The protests in Iran against the regime have now passed the 2-week mark and forced the supreme leader to accuse the anti-government protesters of being troublemakers and a bunch of vandals just trying to please the president of the US. Iran was almost completely cut off from the internet on the 8th of January. As the government struggled to contain the most serious wave of protests in years, the latest demonstrations began in late December, after shopkeepers in Tehran shut their stores to protest rising prices and have since spread across the country to provincial cities and towns. The unrest comes at a time when the Iranian leadership is at its most vulnerable in decades as it grapples with a confluence of intensifying external and domestic pressures. At least 62 people have been killed, including 14 security personnel and 48 protesters, since demonstrations began, according to the human rights activist news agency, an overseas-based Iranian rights group. The movement has quickly moved far beyond isolated groups and now includes people from multiple social strata that include bazaar merchants and small business owners, students and university communities, workers and professionals, and the middle class. The protests have now extended beyond major urban centers. The unrest is nationwide, with demonstrations in over 100 towns and cities across all 31 provinces. There has, for the moment, not been any elite fracture, but differences seem to be emerging on how to respond to the crisis by different factions within the regime. In previous waves of unrest, the absence of elite fracture kept the regime in control despite mass dissent. This time, while the system shows strain, the security apparatus has largely remained unified in repression, and elite rivalry has so far been about policy strategy rather than regime overthrow. This week, the U.S. Navy captured a tanker that was part of the shadow fleet that services Russia, Venezuela, and Iran in order to evade sanctions. The U.S. currently has a quarantine around Venezuela to prevent tankers from coming or going. In this case, a tanker managed to slip through and was chased across the Atlantic until it was caught near Iceland. The tanker lofted a Russian flag, and as a result, the Russians called the White House and said, "This is one of ours. Do not take it." But the U.S. took it anyway. This is the first time ever in modern history that the U.S. has boarded and captured a nationally flagged tanker. This now means it's game on for the entire shadow fleet. That until now was how Russia got around Western sanctions. Over the next weeks and months, it's likely now that entire shadow fleet that Russia has been using will collapse, which will impact Russian and Iranian revenues. This now means Venezuela's energy transport will be ending, but this was ended in dramatic fashion when the U.S. kidnapped the Venezuelan president. The U.S. has now thrown another spanner at Russia, who will now need to find an alternative form of transport for its energy. It's now been over a week since the U.S. kidnapped the president of Venezuela and sent the world into a tailspin. Since then, the Trump administration has been making wildly inconsistent claims with its statements of why they conducted such an act. The administration said they're going to go to war with other countries. And they're not going to go to war with other countries. They said they should be trusted, or they should be feared, that they're going after Greenland, that they're going to go after Brazil. Trump even accused Venezuela of stealing American oil. Therefore, Venezuelan oil was always American oil. The U.S. government's indictment focuses on cocaine trafficking and does not mention fentanyl, a potent synthetic opioid responsible for most drug overdose deaths in the U.S. Now, the United States Justice Department has withdrawn its key claim it previously made about drug trafficking in Venezuela. In a revised criminal indictment, prosecutors no longer describe Cartel de los Soles as an actual drug trafficking organization. Now it's described as a system of corruption rather than a cartel. The whole incident is sounding much like the invasion of Iraq and the infamous weapons of mass destruction that led to a decades-long American occupation that ended in disaster.